Hey, welcome into another episode of the Fat Guy Podcast. I'm the Fat Guy. Most people call me Brett Mason. I'm so glad you've decided to listen to another episode today. A reminder that you can subscribe to us on your favorite social media, or heck, just subscribe to us on all of them. Why don't you? We have the same username across all social media. So whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or even Snapchat, you just want to add us. Our username is Fat Guy Podcast, all one word. You want to subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss an upcoming episode or conveniently be able to scroll back and look at previous episodes? The easiest way to do that is to download the Spreaker app, Spreaker, Spreaker. It's a free app. That's the company that hosts my podcast. You can download that free app no matter what kind of device you have. Once you download it, search for Fat Guy Podcast. Once you find our podcast, follow it and favorite it, and you'll get updated about new episodes. And more importantly, I think for a lot of people, you can scroll back and find topics that you would like to listen to that maybe you missed. Of course, if you already do the podcast, you know, a lot of people do. I do. I use the built-in podcasting app that comes with Apple products. You can find us on there as well. We are hosted on Apple Podcasts. Just search for Fat Guy Podcast. Same is true if you're a Android person. The Google Play Store has our podcast as well. So a quick disclaimer and a little bit about me. So I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a medical professional. I have no formal medical training. I have, however, done hundreds and hundreds of hours of research into health, primarily weight loss, but health in a lot of areas, including cancer, as I spent a lot of time trying to help my mom survive and be as healthy as long as possible as she battled ovarian cancer. I have lost 125 pounds, most of that with a ketogenic diet, and I recommend a ketogenic diet as one major tool, although there are several, to anybody who is just not able to lose weight. If you're one of those people, and this is the people I'm talking to, this is how you know if I'm talking to you or not. If you've tried to lose weight and can't, no matter what you do, or you've lost 10 and gained 15, lost 25, gained 35, I'm talking to you. If you need to lose 50 or more, 100 or more, 150 or more, 200 or more, you're morbidly obese, you're my crowd, you are me. And my goal in life is to share my story, share my experiences in hopes that it will help you. That being said, I'm not a doctor. I have no medical training, and you should always consult with a medical professional before you get any kind of diet or weight loss program or any of that. But one caveat that I would say to that is if you mention trying a ketogenic diet to your doctor and they look at you and tell you it's going to kill you or it's horrible or something, I would just find a new doctor, okay? But again, who you choose, completely up to you. So I'm going to talk about the one blood test that every person should take that doctors don't prescribe. Now, I have one of the greatest doctors on the planet, and I had to have a pretty detailed discussion with him to even get this test. And as I recall, he ordered two different tests because he didn't know which one to order because it's just never a test that he does. And I have a great doctor. So if you have a crappy doctor or a mediocre doctor, it could be challenging for you. Luckily, my doctor will listen to me, and I can say, hey, I've researched this, and I've studied this, and I believe this test will help reveal where my health is at in this area, and I would like it. And, you know, he's pretty good about that. So having a good doctor is a key to success. So the test that you should have is a fasting insulin test. Now, typically, your doctor is going to try to make sure, you know, that you're not pre-diabetic or you haven't turned type 2 diabetic or whatever. And they're going to test your blood sugar, your fasting blood sugar. They may even, if they're serious about it, test your A1C, which is like a 3-month average of your blood sugar, basically, is what that is. So I've talked about this on previous podcasts, but I want to devote an entire podcast to it. The problem with using a blood sugar test to test your health in regards to how your insulin is working and your level of health with blood sugar is that your blood sugars can be fine and your body can be severely metabolically challenged and deranged. So how this works is, I'll explain how it works, and I think this will help you understand why every 3 months or every 6 months, you should go get a fasting insulin test. And you should track it and see if you're making progress in improving your insulin sensitivity, because that's what's going to keep you from getting type 2 diabetes. And if you already have type 2 diabetes, it's going to show you that you are making great progress in arresting it, or at the very least arresting the biomarkers of it, which is essentially the same. So why do you get type 2 diabetes? Okay, why do you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes? Well, the reason you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes is your body can't handle the blood sugar anymore. So the insulin goes out to deal with the blood sugar and shuttle it off into your muscles and shuttle it off into your liver and handle it effectively. And at some point, after bombarding your body nonstop with sugar for decades and decades, your body can't do it anymore. And it can no longer control your blood sugar levels, and they get out of control. The thing that you don't know, and that doctors never talk about, is that process didn't happen last week. If you were to get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes today, that process didn't start a week ago. It started 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think the best estimates we have now is somewhere in the 10 to 30 year range. So I know it's a pretty big range, but basically we split the difference and say it probably happens for most people 20 years before you're diagnosed. So what happens? Well, your body starts becoming insulin resistant. But you're not testing insulin. They don't ever test you for insulin, so you don't know that. They always test your blood sugar. So let's say year one of insulin resistance, okay? Let's say you got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes today. Let's go back 20 years. What happened 20 years ago? Well, 20 years ago, you probably went in and had a blood test, and your fasting blood sugar was normal, and they said everything was okay. But what they didn't test was your insulin, and you had just started being insulin resistant. In other words, your body was having to pump out more insulin than a normal person to deal with the blood sugar. So, sure, your blood sugar levels are normal, but you're having to use more insulin than a normal person to achieve that blood sugar level. And so over the course of the next 5 years, that keeps crippling up, let's just say, and I'll throw a number out there. 5 years later, you're using twice as much insulin as you used 5 years ago, but it's still keeping your blood sugar levels normal. So when you go into your doctor for a fasting blood glucose test, he looks at your blood glucose and it's 92, and he's like, oh, that's great. You're in great shape. But he didn't ever test your fasting insulin, and it's double what it should be at this point. So we continue going on. 5 years go by, and you have another fasting blood glucose test at your doctor's office. And your fasting blood glucose is 94. Oh, great, the doctor says. Yes, that's fantastic. You got a healthy blood sugar. What he didn't test was your insulin, though, and it's now taken triple the amount of insulin that it took 10 years ago to achieve that blood sugar level. And this goes on and on and on until finally your beta cells in your pancreas can't crank out enough insulin to deal with the blood sugar. You are so insulin resistant that it just can't keep up anymore. It's incapable of keeping up anymore. And you go in and the doctor tests your blood sugar and it's 130. And oh crap, you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic. Well, what if we could have known this 20 years ahead of time, or 10 years ahead of time, or 15 years ahead of time, or even 5 years ahead of time? How much more likely would we have had a chance to get healthy if we had been able to beat it before we finally reached terminal effectiveness with our insulin levels? And so you can diagnose that you're going to be a diabetic way before a doctor can. So when you go to the doctor, tell your doctor, I want a fasting insulin test. All right, so you get your fasting insulin test. What are the numbers that you want? Because I'll just be honest with you, it's very likely that your doctor doesn't even know. I mean, you've reached this point where the pancreas can no longer pump out the inordinate amount of insulin that's required to keep your blood glucose in check. All they know is that you have type 2 diabetes. Your pancreas is still doing insulin, but it just isn't working. And your doctor is going to really have no clue probably, and I don't want to speak for everybody's doctor, but I think it's a fair assessment. Your doctor will have no clue where your fasting insulin is, because it's nothing he ever checks. So I'm going to share this with you, so you can do your own test. So when you get the results back from your insulin test, it'll come back in a UU/ml format. What does that mean? I'll just be honest with you. I'm not 100% sure what it means. It's a unit of measurement, like depending on what you're measuring. You'll have things measured in milligrams per liter or milligrams per deciliter. You got all these different units of measurement. I would say, for the purposes of knowing what the range is, you don't need to know what that is. It's not important. So when you go in, don't worry about being able to tell your doctor the unit of measurement. Just ask for the fasting insulin test. And when you get the insulin test back, just look at the number. Here's the number that you want. So you would think 0 would be best, right? 0 would be great. You don't want 0. That means your body isn't putting out any insulin, and that means you're a type 1 diabetic. Which you probably aren't. You would already know that. You'd probably already be dead, or you'd be in very serious condition. You want it to be 2 or 3 on the low end, all the way up to maybe the 8 range at the top end, something like that. They say the average fasting insulin rate in America is 8.8. I know you don't want 8.8 because half the country has type 2 diabetes. So I think 8.8 is probably too high. For me, I can just tell you what my goal is, and this isn't medical advice. I'm just telling you what my goal is. My goal is to have my fasting insulin be between 3 and 5. I think 4 is probably the sweet spot. I'd like to hit it, but if I'd hit 3 or if I hit 4 or if I hit 5, I'd be happy. Now, the first time I ever had a fasting insulin test, I'll tell you what it was. It was 12. And I plan on getting it again here coming up in a month or so. 12 is a high risk range. And that is borne out with me, is because right when I first started losing weight, I had 2 fasting blood sugar tests above 126, and that put me in the pre-diabetic range. So, I didn't know this information. I wish I had 5 or 10 years ago. So, look, you're in a relatively healthy range. I'd say if you're in the 2 to 3 on the low end, up to around 8 on the high end. I think you should, for me, I can't tell you because I'm not a doctor. For me, I want to hit the 3 to 5 range. I want to be 3, 4, 5, something like that. Once you get over 10, I'd say once you get over 8.8, let's just round it up to 9. You get 9 or higher, you're in a bad range. You're headed towards type 2 diabetes pretty quickly. I would say this, I'd get another test. If I had an insulin test today and the results came back, it was 11, I would schedule one for 3 weeks later and do it again and see if it was 11 again or 10 or 12 or if it's in that same range, because there's always aberrations that happen. But once you confirm it, it's a good sign that you need to start doing things to control your insulin. And we can talk about what those things are, but I would like to dedicate an entire podcast to it. So we're not going to get into it too much during this podcast. Basically, I just want you to understand that there's a test out there that you need to know about. Really high risk. If you're 12 or higher, you're diabetic, you're pre-diabetic or whatever. You have severely deranged metabolism. You're fat, most likely. You may be skinny fat, where you hold all your fat is all visceral fat, so it's wrapped around your organs. So on the outside, you may not look all that fat, but you are holding on to fat everywhere. So, these are some things that you need to know about. Now, I'll answer the question, so what? So other than the type 2 diabetes coming up, what else is an issue of having elevated insulin levels? Well, these are a lot of things I didn't know that I do know now. These are symptoms you'll have if your insulin is chronically in an elevated state. It's called hyperinsulinemia. These are a range of health issues that you can have some of them, half of them, or all of them. So it's no laughing matter. It's nothing to scoff at. The first one is stubborn fat loss. If you're a person that you can't lose weight and you've tried everything and it just doesn't work, I just about give you 10 to 1 odds that it's because you have hyperinsulinemia. Your fasting insulin level is high. Your insulin never falls low enough for you to lose weight. High blood pressure is caused by chronically elevated insulin. Chronic headaches and migraines is caused by it. Gout, skin tags. This is a tip that I learned about a year ago. Skin tags, I've asked the doctor, I'm like, what causes skin tags? He's like, oh, it just happens to people. No, it doesn't just happen to people. It's one of the prime symptoms of chronically elevated insulin. So if you have skin tags, you most likely have chronically elevated levels of insulin. If you experience vertigo from time to time, tinnitus from time to time, for men or women, if you have infertility problems, if you're a man, you have erectile dysfunction. If you have prostatic issues, if you have PCOS, that for women that's polycystic ovarian syndrome, all of these are symptoms of chronically elevated chronically elevated insulin. It's no laughing matter. And unfortunately, unlike blood sugar, it's not something that we can test at home yet. Hopefully, we will be able to at some time, but you're going to have to go to your doctor to get the test. And again, your doctor may have never even ordered this test ever. But you need to get your fasting insulin level tested. If it does nothing else for you, it'll be that aha moment where you'll go, God, that Brett Mason knows what he's talking about, because I can't ever lose weight, or I have erectile dysfunction, or I have skin tags, or I have been suffering with gout. And I never knew why. And bam, here it is. Why didn't somebody tell me this before? So, the one last thing, because my podcast is basically about weight loss, even though I'm all about all various forms of health. The last thing I'd say is, I believe it's about 4.5 to 5 in that range. They say that your insulin needs to fall below before your body starts going and burning fat as fuel. So that's where you want it. You want to get it down to that range and keep it there as long as possible to burn fat, to lose weight. And if your fasting insulin is 12, of course you're never losing weight. Your insulin is never getting anywhere near 5. If you're fasted and your insulin is 12, imagine how high it is when you're eating. So you're just never going to lose weight. So knowing this information, knowing that insulin is not only a escort for blood glucose to muscle cells and the liver, it is also a fat storage hormone. It's also a sex hormone, and it's also several other things. But as it relates to weight loss, these are the things we need to remember. Once you know this, we need to get the fat storage function of insulin to work correctly, and you do that by lowering your serum levels of insulin. So you got to get them down. Now, how do we do that? What can we do? The good news is there's all kinds of tools that you can deploy. Either pick one that you like best and can do, or do several of them together in conjunction with each other for a really powerful insulin lowering effect. But we'll talk about that in the next podcast. I'll devote my next entire podcast, I will devote to every tool I know of to not only get your insulin down into that normal range, but to also, you actually can improve and reverse this insulin resistance. You can actually reverse it so that your body becomes more sensitive to insulin again. So not only are we using tools to keep it down, we're actually also working our body back to working normally again, like a naturally thin person, which I think is invaluable. But it's also exciting. It's very exciting. There is the potential that you could live the rest of your life in a much more normal manner than you've lived the first part of your life, which, if you're like me, you've been fat your whole life, is a very, very exciting prospect. So, subscribe on the social media, Fat Guy Podcast. Snapchat is a good one because I share what I eat a lot, and I also share other things on there. I'd say my Facebook page is where I show everything: articles, links to new podcasts, all kinds of things like that, tips and tricks. That's also a good way to contact me, is on the Facebook page. Instagram is a good contact there as well. And Snapchat. Shoot me a message on Snapchat. No matter which one you choose, the username is Fat Guy Podcast. And the other thing I highly encourage you to do is go download that Spreaker app right now. Spreaker. Download the Spreaker app. immediately go search for Fat Guy Podcast. Once you find me, follow it and favorite it so you get notified. And next week, you'll be here when we talk about how do we fix our fasting insulin so that we can reverse all these problems. Stubborn fat loss, the hypertension, the headaches, migraines, gout, skin tags, vertigo, tinnitus, infertility, erectile dysfunction, prostatic diseases, and PCOS. How do we start fixing those things? That'll be on next week's episode. You could literally save somebody's life by sharing this on your social media. Click the share button and share this on your social media, especially if you have friends that are 50, 75, 100, 150, or 200 pounds overweight. You could be the very thing that changes their life. And that's my goal in life, is to change my life and to change as many other people's lives with me as I can bring along. That is what gives me meaning in this world. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Make sure you take care of all that business so you're ready for next week's show when we will talk about how you fix this elevated insulin problem. In the meantime, call your doctor and tell him you want a fasting insulin test ASAP. Have a good time. Enjoy your getting stuck in the arm. Enjoy getting your test results back. And be here for next week's show. We'll talk to you then.